At Christmas, they said, I ruined the family atmosphere. On New Year's, I sold the country house where they always spent the holidays. If you're watching this, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Eleanor Winters, and this is how I learned to be seen again. The Christmas decorations felt like a charade. I wound the garland around the banister just as Richard and I had done for decades, but my movements were mechanical. 3 months after his funeral, our colonial Connecticut home echoed with silence. I adjusted the angel on top of the tree, her serene face mocking my solitude. Richard would have steadied the ladder, his hand warm against my back. Careful, Ellie, he would have said. Now there was only the quiet creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. The phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. Michael's name flashed on the screen. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. His voice carried that forced cheerfulness people use with the elderly or infirm. I was just decorating the tree, I said, trying to sound upbeat. I'm thinking we should do Christmas at the lake house this year, the way we always have. About that. A pause, the sound of a door closing. Let's discuss it later. How are you holding up? I'm managing. I straightened a photograph of our family at the lake, Michael and Caroline flanking Richard and me. Grandchildren scattered around us like wildflowers. That's good. Hey, I need to run. Budget meeting. I'll call you this weekend. Of course. I understand. But the line had already gone dead. I moved to the kitchen to make tea, the ritual providing small comfort. Through the window, I watched my neighbor Beth hurry past with shopping bags. She'd brought casseroles after the funeral, but hadn't called in weeks. The kettle whistled. I reached for Richard's mug out of habit before catching myself. 1 cup, not 2. 1 saucer, 1 spoon. The math of widowhood was brutally simple. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. Can't talk now. In a meeting. Love you. I scrolled through our recent exchanges, brief, perfunctory, increasingly rare. I dialed her number anyway, needing to hear a familiar voice. Mom? Caroline answered, her whisper sharp with irritation. I'm in the middle of something. I won't keep you. I just wanted to discuss Christmas plans. I thought, hold on. Muffled sounds, then Caroline's voice, not meant for me. Mom's still not handling it well. My hand tightened around the phone. Who was she talking to? What had I done to warrant such dismissal? Sorry about that, she returned, voice artificially bright. Can we talk about this tomorrow? I really need to go. Of course, I kept my voice steady. Tomorrow. After hanging up, I wandered into Richard's study. The familiar scent of his cologne still lingered faintly on his leather chair. I ran my fingers along the spines of his books, titles he'd read aloud to me on winter evenings. I pulled an album from the shelf, our wedding. Caroline's birth, Michael's graduation, lake house summers, a chronicle of a life spent ensuring everyone else's happiness. In our last photo together, Richard's face was gaunt, but his eyes still crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He'd squeezed my hand that day and whispered, You'll be all right. Ellie, you're stronger than you know. I closed the album, suddenly aware of a terrible truth. In becoming the silent foundation of our family, I had made myself invisible, and now, in my grief, I was disappearing completely. Michael's Boston home gleamed with tasteful holiday decor, nothing homemade, everything designer selected. I arrived early, carrying my signature sweet potato casserole, the dish Richard had always requested twice. Oh, Mom. Diana, my daughter-in-law, intercepted me at the kitchen threshold. You didn't need to bring anything. We have the caterer handling everything. I thought the grandchildren might like. They're all on special diets now. She took the dish and placed it on a counter far from the other food. But it's sweet of you to try. I watched her rearrange my carefully browned marshmallow topping before turning away. In the living room, my grandchildren were absorbed in their phones, offering distracted hugs without looking up. Grandma's here, Michael announced, as if declaring a weather pattern that required acknowledgement but no real response. Dinner was a performance of normalcy. I smiled and nodded as conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. When I mentioned the writing class I'd joined at the community center, my eldest grandson glanced at his watch. That's nice, Mom, Caroline said, in the same tone she'd used when her children brought home kindergarten artwork. I excused myself after dessert, claiming I needed the restroom. Instead, I wandered down the hallway, seeking a moment of quiet. As I approached the kitchen, I heard my children's voices. We can't do Christmas at the lake house this year, Caroline was saying. Mom will turn it into a memorial service for Dad. She'll ruin the atmosphere with all that grief. Agreed. Michael's voice was firm. We need to take control of the situation before she makes the holidays depressing for everyone. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. Have you spoken to Harrison about the property yet? Caroline asked. Yes, I checked with the family attorney. Surprisingly, the lake house is solely in Mom's name. Dad put it there for their anniversary or something. What? He always told us it would be ours eventually. Well, it will be, but we need to get her to sign it over while she's still, coherent. Caroline laughed. Did you see her looking for her glasses earlier? They were on her head. I've been softening up my contacts at the Vermont Land Conservation Trust, Michael continued, making sure they won't interfere with our plans once we acquire the property. The development potential for that lakefront is incredible. James says we could triple our investment within 5 years. I stepped back, a floorboard creaking beneath my weight. The conversation paused. Is someone there? Michael called. I retreated silently to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back seemed smaller, diminished. When had my children started seeing me as an obstacle rather than a person? Later, as Michael drove me back to my hotel, he mentioned casually, Caroline and I were thinking we might try somewhere new for Christmas this year, maybe her place in Aspen. But we've always gone to the lake house, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's our tradition. Traditions change. Mom, Dad's gone now. He patted my hand as if I were a child. It's time to make new memories. I turned to look out the window, hiding my face, not because I was crying, but because for the first time in decades, I felt something unfamiliar burning beneath my grief. Anger. December unfolded like a series of small paper cuts, each one insignificant alone, but collectively unbearable. I called Michael on a Tuesday. His secretary answered, He's in meetings all day, Mrs. Winters. I'll have him call you back. He never did. I texted Caroline about helping with my granddaughter Lily's science project. Thanks, Mom, but we've got it covered, she replied. Lily's working with a tutor now. The real sting came on a snowy Friday when I decided to surprise Caroline with homemade gingerbread cookies, Richard's favorite recipe. I took the train to New York, navigated the subway, and arrived at her apartment building with snow melting in my hair and the cookies still warm in their tin. The doorman called up, and Caroline buzzed me in immediately, which should have been my first clue. Something was wrong. When the elevator opened on her floor, I heard laughter and music spilling from her apartment. Mom! Caroline's smile froze when she saw me. Behind her, a dozen people in festive attire mingled in her elegantly decorated living room. What are you doing here? I brought cookies, I said, lifting the tin like an offering. I should have called first. She took the tin and stepped into the hallway, partially closing the door behind her. You really should have. I'm hosting the department heads from work. I can just drop these off and go. No, come in. Her sigh was almost imperceptible. Just for a minute. Inside, Carolyn introduced me to a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. This is my mother. She's been having a rough time since Dad died. I smiled through the humiliation, excused myself after 15 minutes, and took the long train ride home alone. The following Wednesday, a stranger arrived at my door with a leather portfolio and a practiced smile. Mrs. Winters, I'm Howard Keller, financial advisor. Your son arranged for me to help you organize your affairs. I invited him in reluctantly. Over tea, Howard presented a series of documents outlining simplification strategies for my assets. The lake house in particular, he said, tapping a glossy brochure, represents a significant maintenance burden for someone in your position. We recommend liquidating this asset. My position? I asked. Your age bracket, he clarified smoothly. Managing remote property becomes increasingly challenging. That evening, Michael called. Howard said you seemed resistant to his suggestions. I didn't realize I needed financial management, I said carefully. It's just practical, Mom. The lake house is a lot for someone your age to maintain. After hanging up, I called my old friend Margaret. We drifted apart during Richard's illness, my world shrinking to the dimensions of his needs. Over coffee the next day, she studied me with concern. You look exhausted, Eleanor. I'm fine, I said automatically. No, you're not. She covered my hand with hers. You've spent your entire life accommodating others. Richard was your partner. These children have always seen you as support staff. Her bluntness shocked me. That's a harsh assessment. Is it wrong? She raised an eyebrow. Richard adored you, but even he took for granted that you'd handle everything emotional while he handled everything practical. I stirred my coffee, watching the cream create patterns. It's just how our generation did things. Perhaps, Margaret sipped her tea. By the way, my son mentioned something about development plans for your lake area. Apparently, there's a company buying up properties along that shoreline. Luxury condos, I believe. That night, I sat alone in Richard's study, surrounded by the books and papers he'd left behind. For the first time, I wondered what else he might have left unsaid. The text arrived while I was wrapping presents, each one chosen with careful consideration of the recipient. My phone chimed with Caroline's group message. Change of plans for Christmas. We're gathering at my Aspen condo instead of the lake house. We need a change of scenery this year. The lake house feels too connected to Dad. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Before I could respond, another message appeared from Michael. Great idea. Mom, this will be easier for you too. No memories to trigger grief. I set down the half-wrapped book I'd chosen for Lily, a collection of poetry by the lake author Richard used to read aloud during summer evenings. I was looking forward to the lake house, I typed, then deleted it. Whatever works best for everyone, I sent instead. Michael called an hour later. Mom, we're thinking of your well-being, he said, his lawyer voice in full effect. A mountain retreat will be less triggering than the lake house filled with memories. I appreciate your concern, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded when inside I felt anything but anything. Will Martin know you've canceled? He always prepares the house for our arrival. Martin Crowley had been our caretaker for 15 years, his meticulous attention keeping the property pristine. Don't worry about Martin. We've kept in touch with him. Something in his tone made me pause. You've been in contact with Martin? Just routine maintenance things, Michael said quickly. Listen, I need to run. Diana's waiting for me. After we hung up, I opened my laptop, a gift from Richard last Christmas, when his hands still worked well enough to show me how to use it. You need to join the digital age, Ellie, he teased. I navigated to my granddaughter's Instagram page. Lily rarely posted, but when she did, she often tagged her cousins. I scrolled through recent photos and felt my breath catch. There they were, my grandchildren on the dock of our lake house, the distinctive boathouse visible in the background. The date stamp showed the gathering had happened just 3 weeks ago. More photos followed. A bonfire on our beach, teenagers lounging in our living room, Caroline's husband James raising a wine glass on our porch. The caption read, "Freedom from Grandma's rules." My hands trembled as I clicked through more evidence of their deception. They'd been using my home, enjoying it, partying in it, while systematically excluding me from their plans. I reached for the phone and dialed Martin's number. Mrs. Winters. He sounded genuinely pleased, then hesitant. Is everything all right? Martin, I just saw photos of my family using the lake house, recently. A heavy silence. Mrs. Winters, I thought you knew. Carolyn said you had approved their visits but weren't feeling up to joining them. She said you were too grief-stricken to deal with property matters and that you'd asked her to handle things temporarily. The betrayal settled into my bones like winter cold. I see. I'm so sorry. Martin's distress was palpable. I would never have. It's not your fault, Martin. You were misled. I paused. Thank you for telling me the truth. I hung up and walked slowly to the kitchen. The house Richard and I had shared for 40 years suddenly felt like a museum exhibit. The life of Eleanor Winters before she understood. I made tea, my hands steady despite everything. Sitting at the kitchen table, I let the tears come, not the muffled sobs I'd grown accustomed to since Richard's death, but quiet, cleansing tears that left me strangely calm. When the crying stopped, I went to Richard's desk and removed the letter his attorney had delivered 6 weeks after the funeral, the one I'd been too afraid to open. As if Richard's final words might somehow make his absence more final. It was time. Richard's handwriting, once as bold and straight as the man himself, had grown shaky in his final months. Still, I would have recognized it anywhere. My dearest Ellie, the letter began, if you're reading this, our goodbye came sooner than we hoped. There are things I meant to discuss with you after my heart procedure, but I'm writing this as a precaution. I traced his words with my fingertip, remembering how his hands looked holding a pen, strong and capable, even as illness weakened him. In my study behind the Dickens collection, there's a safe you never knew about. The combination is our wedding date, 07/1643. What you'll find there will be difficult to accept, but you deserve to know. I moved to his study, pulled out the row of leather-bound Dickens, and found the wall safe he'd described. My hands shook as I entered our wedding date. The mechanism clicked, and the door swung open. Inside lay a journal and a manila folder thick with documents. The journal contained Richard's private thoughts pages of increasing concern about financial discrepancies he'd noticed in family accounts. 3 years of entries documented his growing suspicion that James, Caroline's husband, was misappropriating funds from family investments. "I've confirmed that $42,000 is missing from Andrew's college fund," one entry read. "James claims market fluctuations, but I've verified independently that's not possible. I need more evidence before involving Eleanor. She values family peace above all." The final entry, dated 3 days before his fatal heart attack, was the most devastating. "I have sufficient evidence now. Time to tell Ellie everything. This will break her heart, but she deserves the truth about James. I only pray she can forgive me for keeping her in the dark so long." The manila folder contained account statements, transfer records, and correspondence that painted an irrefutable picture. James had been systematically diverting family funds for years. But the deepest cut was a series of emails I found at the bottom of the stack messages between Caroline and a company called Lakeside Development Partners. My daughter had been working as a consultant for developers who wanted to build luxury condos along our lake. Their plans required acquiring all properties on our stretch of shoreline, including our beloved summer home. Caroline stood to earn a substantial commission if the project proceeded. "The only potential obstacle," Caroline had written, "is my mother's sentimental attachment to our family property. My father's recent passing may actually facilitate the acquisition process." I sat back in Richard's chair, letting the documents fall into my lap. The room seemed to spin around me as decades of assumptions crumbled. I had believed my greatest purpose was maintaining family harmony, sacrificing my needs, overlooking slights, accommodating everyone else's preferences. I had prided myself on being the peacekeeper. And all the while, my children had been measuring the dimensions of my life, calculating how to diminish it further for their gain. I returned to Richard's letter, reading his final words. "Ellie, you've always put everyone else first. Maybe it's time to consider what you want. The lake house is in your name alone, my anniversary gift to you 15 years ago. Whatever you decide, know that I've always admired your strength, even when you couldn't see it yourself." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my pocket. Grief still weighed heavily, but something else was rising within me, something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Ruth Goldman's office," answered a familiar voice. "Ruth, it's Eleanor Winters. I need your help." Ruth's office hadn't changed in the 20 years I'd known her leather-bound law books lining the walls, certificates displayed without ostentation, the scent of lemon polish in the air. Ruth herself, now in her 70s, regarded me over reading glasses perched on her nose. "So Michael already checked on the lake house ownership," she confirmed, reviewing her notes. "And you're certain about what you discovered in Richard's safe?" I pushed the folder of evidence across her desk. "I wish I weren't." Ruth examined the documents, her expression growing darker with each page. "This is serious, Eleanor. James could face criminal charges for this level of financial misconduct. And Caroline's involvement with the developers? Not illegal, but certainly a profound conflict of interest." Ruth removed her glasses. "What do you want to do? Confront them directly?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I need to understand all my options first." Ruth nodded, pulled out a file, and confirmed what Michael had discovered. Richard had transferred full ownership of the lake house to me 15 years earlier. "You have complete control over that property," she said. "You can do whatever you want with it." "What about the Vermont Land Conservation Trust? Michael mentioned speaking with them." Ruth's eyebrows raised. "Yes, they've been interested in that lakefront for years. They approached Richard several times about including the property in their watershed protection program. He always deferred, saying the decision should be yours." I sat straighter in my chair. "I'd like to contact them." In the following days, I worked methodically. I documented James's financial misdeeds and Caroline's conflict of interest. I reconnected with Thomas Hayes, a widowed colleague from the university who had always treated me as an equal rather than an extension of Richard. "I've missed our conversations," Thomas said over coffee. "Your insights on Wolf were always more interesting than the department's official position." "I've been invisible for so long," I admitted, even to myself. Thomas introduced me to several community groups where I was welcomed for my own knowledge and experience rather than as Richard's widow. For the first time in months, I felt seen. When Martin called to check in, his voice was still heavy with guilt. "Mrs. Winters, I can't express how sorry I am about the misunderstanding." "Martin," I interrupted gently, "I'm not angry with you, but I would like you to change the locks on the property, citing security concerns, and please let me know immediately if anyone attempts to visit." "Of course," he promised. "May I ask, what are you planning to do with the property?" "Something Richard would have approved of," I said. In mid-November, I contacted Diane Lawson at the Vermont Land Conservation Trust. Our initial conversation was cautious on both sides. "We've been interested in preserving that shoreline for years," Diane explained, "but the process typically takes 9–12 months due to funding requirements, board approvals, and legal work." "What if time is a factor?" I asked. "Unfortunately, even with a motivated seller, our hands are tied by our funding cycles." I thanked her and hung up, disappointed but not deterred. Ruth had helped me develop a strategy that didn't depend on quick action. I could afford to wait. That evening, Thomas invited me to a chamber music concert. "You mentioned Richard loved Schubert," he said. "I thought you might enjoy this performance." At intermission, standing in the concert hall lobby, I caught my reflection in a mirror. The woman looking back seemed different, still grieving, yes, but no longer diminished. There was purpose in her eyes, a straightness to her shoulders I hadn't seen in months. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Aspen, Christmas Eve. I would attend as planned, playing the role they expected, the slightly forgetful, easily dismissed grandmother. But I would be watching them with new eyes, seeing not who I wished they were, but who they had shown themselves to be. Caroline's Aspen condo gleamed with minimalist holiday decor, white lights, silver ornaments, not a hint of the homemade decorations that had defined our family celebrations. I arrived bearing carefully wrapped gifts and my mother's fruitcake recipe, playing my expected role. "Mom, you didn't need to bring food," Caroline said, taking the cake and setting it aside without a second glance. "We have a chef preparing everything." "Old habits," I smiled, handing my coat to the waiting staff member. Michael arrived with Diana and their children, his arm around my shoulder slightly too tight, his voice slightly too loud. "Mom looks great, doesn't she? Doing so well, considering everything." I watched them all, my family, through this new lens of awareness. The way Caroline and Michael exchanged glances when I mentioned the writing class I'd joined. How they smoothly steered conversation away from any mention of the lake house. The performance of affection that never quite reached their eyes. "The atmosphere feels so much lighter this year, doesn't it?" Caroline remarked over dinner, looking pointedly at me. "Yes," I agreed mildly. "It does feel different." James dominated the conversation with investment talk, his confidence unshaken, despite what I now knew. When he mentioned family legacy planning, Michael shot him a warning glance. "Speaking of planning," Michael interjected, refilling his wine glass, "we should discuss some practical arrangements before everyone leaves tomorrow." "Let's save business for after the holidays," Diana suggested, and I caught a note of tension in her voice I hadn't noticed before. "Excellent idea," I said, patting her hand gratefully. Later, as everyone gathered in the living room, I excused myself, claiming fatigue from travel. "You all stay up and enjoy yourselves. I'll see you in the morning." In the guest room, I sat at the small desk and opened my laptop. A new email had arrived from Diane Lawson at the Vermont Land Conservation Trust. "Mrs. Winters, I'm writing with unexpected news. An anonymous donor with strong environmental interests has stepped forward, offering immediate funding specifically earmarked for your lake property. This unprecedented development could allow us to complete the transaction by March rather than waiting until next fall. If you're still interested, we should discuss details as soon as possible." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. This changed everything. Instead of a prolonged strategy spanning months, I could act decisively before spring. I walked to the window and looked out at the snowy mountains, remembering countless Christmas Eves at the lake house, Richard stoking the fire, grandchildren hanging stockings, the reflection of colored lights dancing on the water. Those memories would always be mine, regardless of what happened to the property itself. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt not just grief, but anticipation. Tomorrow would bring pain, certainly, but also, finally, truth. I replied to Diane's email with trembling fingers. "I am very interested. Let's move forward as quickly as possible." Then I prepared the envelopes I would distribute after dinner tomorrow, each containing identical letters explaining my decision. I sealed them carefully, wrote each family member's name on the front, and placed them in my handbag. As I climbed into bed, I realized I felt neither vindictive nor sad, just unburdened, like someone who has finally set down a weight they never should have carried. Outside, snow began to fall, covering Aspen in a blanket of white. I watched it gather on the window ledge, thinking of Richard's words. "I've always admired your strength, even when you couldn't see it yourself. I see it now," I whispered to the empty room. Christmas morning arrived with forced cheer and materialistic excess. Designer wrapping paper carpeted Caroline's living room floor as the grandchildren tore through packages containing the latest electronics and branded clothing. I distributed my own modest gifts, hand-knitted scarves for the grandchildren, leather-bound journals for Michael and Caroline, a delicate silver bracelet for Diana. With each gift, I included a sealed envelope. "Something special," I explained. "A tradition your father and I had planned before he passed, but please don't open them until after dinner." Throughout the day, I noticed the small dismissals I had previously rationalized away. How Michael cut me off mid-story about Richard's first Christmas with us. How Caroline sighed, almost imperceptibly, when I offered to help in the kitchen. How my grandchildren's attention slid past me like water off glass. At dinner, James poured expensive wine, while Michael raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, with a meaningful glance at Caroline, "and to practical arrangements that benefit everyone. To family," I countered, lifting my own glass, "and to honesty." After dessert was served, Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, we wanted to discuss the lake house situation. We've been thinking." "Actually," I interrupted gently, "I believe it's time to open those envelopes I gave you." A curious silence fell as they retrieved the sealed envelopes from pockets and side tables. I watched their faces as they read the identical letters inside. Michael spoke first, his voice dangerously quiet. "What is this?" "Exactly what it says," I replied. "I've signed a letter of intent to sell the lake house to the Vermont Land Conservation Trust. The closing is scheduled for March. I'm donating half the proceeds to a grief support foundation in Richard's name." Caroline's face flushed crimson. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," I said. After learning about the lakefront development plans, I paused, watching her eyes widen in recognition. "I contacted the trust. They've been interested in preservation for years. The property will become protected parkland, preventing any development." Michael's lawyer persona snapped into place. "This is nowhere near market value," he argued, though he hadn't seen the offer. "And a letter of intent isn't binding. We can still fix this." "Fix what, exactly?" I asked. "My decision to determine the fate of my own property?" "You had no right," Caroline's voice rose sharply. "That property was meant for all of us." "Actually," I said, remaining calm, "I had every right, and if you'd bothered to consult me instead of planning behind my back, you might have learned that." The room went deathly quiet. James cleared his throat. "I think we all need to take a step back." "I agree," I said, reaching into my handbag for the folder of evidence I'd brought. "There's more you should know." One by one, I laid out the documents Richard had compiled, the financial records showing James's systematic misappropriation of family funds, including the children's education accounts, the emails revealing Caroline's deal with the developers, Richard's journal entries documenting his growing concern and his intention to confront them. "Your father discovered this before he died," I said quietly. "He was waiting for the right moment to address it. That moment never came." James's face had gone pale. "These records are taken out of context. I was merely reallocating funds temporarily." "Stop," Diana's voice cut through his excuses. She was staring at a statement showing withdrawals from her children's accounts. "Just stop." Michael, in full damage control mode, gathered the papers into a pile. "This isn't the time or place. We'll discuss everything rationally after the holidays." Caroline stood abruptly. "I can't believe you would do this to us." She grabbed her coat. "James, we're leaving." As they stormed out, the remaining family members dispersed in uncomfortable silence. Only Diana lingered, studying me with new eyes. "How long have you known about all this?" she asked quietly. "Long enough," I replied. She nodded slowly. "I've suspected something was off with James's investments for a while." Michael wouldn't listen. She hesitated. "I'm sorry, Eleanor, for how we've treated you. I should have seen it sooner." After she left, I sat alone in Caroline's immaculate living room, surrounded by torn wrapping paper and abandoned gifts. I felt no triumph, No vindication, only the quiet certainty that comes from finally speaking truth. The explosive aftermath of Christmas unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. Caroline and James returned to the condo only to pack their things, departing without another word. Michael, drawing on his legal background, immediately began questioning the validity of my agreement with the Conservation Trust. "They've taken advantage of a vulnerable widow," he insisted, pacing Caroline's living room. "This is nowhere near market value." "Have you seen the offer?" I asked mildly. "I don't need to. Lakefront property in Vermont, they're getting it for a song. Perhaps I value things differently than you do." Michael's jaw tightened. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. Grief does things to people's judgment. Does it cause them to manufacture financial records, to create false email trails, to doctor account statements?" I kept my voice even. "Because that's what you're suggesting your father did." His face flushed. "That's not... I'm saying you're misinterpreting." "I'm not misinterpreting anything," I said firmly. "I've had the financial records independently verified. The Conservation Trust has made a fair offer based on multiple professional appraisals, and unlike some, they've been completely transparent about their intentions for the property." "This is absurd." Caroline had returned to the living room, her face blotchy with anger. "You're punishing us because you feel neglected. This is emotional manipulation." "Interesting accusation," I replied, coming from someone who told the caretaker I was too grief-stricken to handle property matters, while using my home for parties behind my back. "It wasn't like that," she protested, but her eyes slid away from mine. "It was exactly like that. Just as it was exactly like James diverting funds from the children's education accounts. Just as it was exactly like you consulting for developers who wanted our property without disclosing your conflict of interest." James stepped forward, his salesman's charm deployed at full strength. "Eleanor, there have been some misunderstandings in the financial records. Market fluctuations can appear suspicious to the untrained eye." "Richard had a very trained eye," I interrupted, "as do the forensic accountants Ruth has consulted." The room went silent at the mention of accountants. Michael and James exchanged alarmed glances. "You've involved outside accountants?" Michael asked, his voice strained. "Not yet," I replied. "That depends on what happens next." Diana had been quiet throughout the confrontation, but now she stood. "I think we all need time to process this." She turned to Michael. "We should pack. Our flight leaves early." As they dispersed to gather their belongings, Caroline remained, her anger cooling into calculation. "So this is your revenge? Destroying family harmony over perceived slights?" "This isn't revenge, Caroline. It's consequence. There's a difference." "Dad would be ashamed of how you're handling this," she said, a final attempt to regain control. I smiled sadly. "Your father left very clear instructions about what he wanted me to know. I think he would be proud that I finally stood up for myself." Later, as most of the family departed for the airport, Diana approached me privately. "Eleanor, I want you to know I had no idea about any of this. The investment accounts, the lake house schemes, Michael keeps financial matters to himself." "I believe you," I said, "and I'm sorry you've been caught in the middle." "No," she shook her head firmly. "I'm sorry I didn't see how they were treating you. I've suspected something was off with James's investments for a while. Michael wouldn't listen when I raised concerns." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "We all have blind spots when it comes to family." "What will you do now?" she asked. "Go home. Move forward. Hope that eventually we can find a way to rebuild on honest ground." Diana nodded. "I hope so too." January arrived with a silence deeper than winter itself. I returned to Connecticut and changed my phone number, giving the new one only to Ruth, Thomas, and a few trusted friends. The inevitable messages came through Ruth's office, first angry, then manipulative, eventually pleading. Michael sent a formal letter threatening legal action to block the sale, claiming I had been coerced by the Conservation Trust. He hired Preston Wallace, a prominent estate attorney known for aggressive tactics. "He's requesting a mental competency evaluation," Ruth informed me during our weekly call. "Schedule it immediately," I replied. "The sooner we address this, the better." The evaluation, conducted by a respected neuropsychologist, confirmed what I already knew. My cognitive function was excellent. "Mrs. Winters displays exceptional clarity and cognitive abilities," the report concluded. Wallace then attempted to argue that the trust had taken advantage of my grief, but backed down when Ruth presented evidence of the fair market valuation and documentation of the trust's long-standing interest in the property. The final blow to Michael's legal challenge came during a conference call that included Wallace, Michael, and Ruth. My client has additional family matters she's chosen not to make public at this time, Ruth stated calmly. She would prefer those matters remain private. The threat of exposing James's financial improprieties and Caroline's conflict of interest hung in the air. The legal maneuvers ceased within days. Instead of dwelling on their betrayal, I focused on moving forward. I rejoined the community board I'd left during Richard's illness. I enrolled in literature courses at the local college. I rearranged our home to better suit my needs, rather than preserving it as a shrine to the past. Thomas became a steady presence in my life, accompanying me to concerts and lectures, engaging me in intellectual discussions I had missed during Richard's illness. Our friendship deepened naturally, without pressure or expectation. When neighbors inquired about my family, I answered honestly, "We're going through a necessary adjustment period." Ruth brought news that James had quietly begun repaying funds to the family accounts. "He's hoping to avoid formal investigation," she explained. "Caroline's developer has pulled out of the lakefront project without her commission. Your decision inspired other neighbors. Several are now in talks with the Conservation Trust. These consequences provided a measure of justice, though they hadn't been my primary goal. What mattered most was reclaiming my own agency after decades of putting everyone else first." One Tuesday morning, the phone rang a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Grandma, it's Lily." My youngest granddaughter's voice brought an unexpected surge of emotion. "Lily, how are you, sweetheart?" "I'm okay," she hesitated. "I got your number from Mrs. Crowley Martin's wife. I hope that's all right." "Of course it is. I'm happy to hear from you. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she rushed on, "for not standing up for you at Christmas, and for using the lake house without telling you. Mom said you knew, but I should have checked directly with you." The simple acknowledgement meant more than elaborate apologies from her parents would have. "Thank you, Lily. That means a great deal to me. Could we maybe get coffee sometime? Just us?" she asked tentatively. "I'd like that very much." After we hung up, I sat with the revelation that while relationships with my children might remain strained, perhaps connections with my grandchildren could be salvaged on more honest terms. That evening, Thomas called to invite me to dinner. "Nothing fancy," he assured me. "Just two old friends and good food." As I dressed for dinner, I noticed my reflection in the mirror, still Eleanor, still grieving, but no longer diminished. The woman looking back at me had found her voice again. 6 days after Christmas, I hosted a small New Year's Eve gathering, not family, but my circle of friends from the community center and university. Thomas arrived early to help arrange chairs and prepare hors d'oeuvres, his quiet competence reminiscent of Richard's, yet distinctly his own. "I wasn't sure you'd feel like celebrating," he admitted as we arranged a cheese board. "I'm not celebrating the past year," I clarified. "I'm welcoming the new one." As guests arrived, I found myself engaged in conversations about books, politics, and local initiatives discussions where my opinions were solicited and valued. No one spoke to me with the careful condescension my children had adopted. No one treated my grief as an inconvenience or my age as a liability. During a lull in conversation, I checked my email and found a message from Diana. "Eleanor, what happened at Christmas only confirmed doubts I've had for years. The way Michael handled this situation, threatening legal action against his own mother, questioning your competence, prioritizing property over family. I've asked for a separation. I want you to know I'm sorry for my role in marginalizing you. I hope we might have a relationship independent of Michael." I responded immediately, thanking her for her honesty and expressing hope for her future, whatever shape it might take. Later, my phone chimed with a text from Lily. "Happy New Year? Grandma, looking forward to our coffee date next week." This was followed by hesitant messages from 2 other grandchildren suggesting the family narrative might be shifting. As midnight approached, I excused myself briefly and walked through my home, the home Richard and I had shared for 40 years. In each room, memories lingered like familiar scents. Richard carving a turkey in the dining room, reading by the fire in the living room, falling asleep with reading glasses perched on his nose in our bedroom. I touched the doorframe of his study, where I had discovered the truth that changed everything. "I miss you," I whispered, "but I think you'd be proud of me." Returning to my guests for the countdown, I accepted a champagne flute from Thomas, who studied me with warm eyes. "You seem lighter somehow," he observed. "I am," I confirmed. I finally put down a burden I never should have carried. As we counted down the seconds to midnight, I felt not just the weight of what I had lost, but the possibility of what might still be gained. The year ahead held uncertainty, but also promised the promise of living on my own terms, of relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, of being seen for who I truly was rather than what I could provide. At midnight, glasses clinked and cheers erupted. Thomas leaned close. "To new beginnings," he said quietly. "To truth," I replied, touching my glass to his, "and to whatever comes next." By mid-March, 7 months after Richard's passing, winter's grip on Connecticut had begun to loosen. The sale of the lake house to the Vermont Land Conservation Trust was complete. The proceeds divided between my account and the Grief Support Foundation established in Richard's name. Diana had called regularly since January, our relationship evolving into something more genuine than before. Several of my grandchildren had reached out independently, including Michael's son Andrew, who was now investigating discrepancies in his college fund with his father's reluctant assistance. I sat in a coffee shop near Columbia University, where I'd been auditing a course on women writers of the 20th century. The bell above the door chimed, and Caroline entered, her confident stride faltering slightly when she saw me. This was our first meeting since Christmas. "Mom," she said, sliding into the chair across from me, "thank you for agreeing to see me." I nodded, taking in the changes 3 months had wrought the shadows beneath her eyes, the absence of her usual polished veneer. "How are you, Caroline?" "I've been better." She placed a cream envelope on the table between us, not a legal document or financial statement, but a handwritten letter. "I wanted to give you this, and to tell you in person that James has moved out. We're separating." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "Don't be. He claims he was only borrowing from the accounts." Her voice hardened. "But I can't trust him anymore." She hesitated. "The development deal collapsed, which is actually a blessing in disguise. It's forced me to reconsider a lot of things. I didn't rush to forgive or absolve her. That would come with time, if at all. Instead, I asked, "Why did you want to meet today?" Caroline pushed the envelope toward me. "To give you this, and to invite you to Lily's school play next week. She specifically asked for you to be there." I accepted both the letter and the invitation, recognizing them as small first steps on a long road. "We'll need to rebuild slowly," I told her, "on equal footing." She nodded, understanding the terms. Later that week, I visited the now public lakefront park, where a small plaque honoring Richard's memory had been installed. Michael met me there, having driven up from Boston at my request. We walked along the familiar shoreline in silence before he spoke. "Your actions forced me to confront what truly matters," he admitted. "I spent so much time chasing status that I forgot how to be a son, and I forgot how to be more than just a mother," I replied. "We both have learning to do." He mentioned that his legal firm was handling the formal investigation into James's financial mismanagement. "I'm personally ensuring all misappropriated funds are recovered," he said, a small step toward accountability. Martin, now employed by the trust to maintain the public space, greeted us warmly. He introduced me to Diane Lawson and several neighbors who thanked me for my role in preserving the natural beauty of the lake. "You started something important here," Diane told me. "This entire shoreline will now be protected for generations." As Michael and I prepared to leave, he asked hesitantly, "Do you think we can ever get back to how things were?" I shook my head. "No, but perhaps we can build something more authentic in its place." The final Sunday in March found me hosting dinner at my Connecticut home. Diana and Lily were present, along with 2 other grandchildren who had reached out independently. Michael and Caroline had both promised to attend the next gathering, though I harbored no illusions about quick healing. Thomas arrived with dessert, our long friendship now deepening into something more 7 months after Richard's passing. The timing felt right, not a replacement for what I'd lost, but a new chapter on its own terms. As we gathered around the table, I realized that my greatest act of courage wasn't standing up to my children's betrayal, but opening myself to joy again afterward. The path forward wouldn't be smooth, but it would be mine to determine. "Richard would be proud of you," Thomas whispered as we cleared dishes together. "No," I corrected him with a small smile. "I'm proud of me." I looked around at this imperfect gathering, not the family I had once imagined, but perhaps the one I needed now. The bonds were fragile, the trust tentative, but real healing had begun, not because I had demanded it or manipulated others into providing it, but because I had finally honored my own worth. After a lifetime of keeping peace at any cost, I had discovered that true harmony could only be built on honesty. It was a lesson learned late, but not too late. Never too late. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.